Hey, welcome back folks. In this video I'm going to be drawing a floating island using the Etherington Brothers tutorials, and I'll place this image off screen and basically go in from penciling to inking to coloring this entire thing just so that you can have an example of how I think when I draw when I'm looking at these tutorials. So I'll start off by making a new canvas in Photoshop. I'm going to make this one 4,000 pixels wide by 4,000 pixels tall and 600 pixels per inch, and I'll keep the other defaults as is, and I'll click create. And let's take a look at my layers. I need to make a brand new layer, and the way that I can do that is by holding down the Shift, Option, Command, N key. On a PC, that's Shift, Alt, Control, N. That makes a brand new layer. That is one of my most often used keyboard shortcuts. And I'll pick a grayish value here, and I'm going to go ahead and load a brush. This is going to be my KMS pencil brush. And what I'll do here is I'll just follow the tutorial, and I'm not going to copy it, but I'll just kind of use some of the insights. So basically the idea is that you're going to create some kind of a random shape. You're going to draw some cracks and crevices. And what we're going to do next is we're going to simply take this and we're going to deconstruct it. So what I'm going to do is I'll drop the opacity of this layer, and I'm going to take each piece, basically trace it and just move it out, and I'll do this for every single layer. Trace it, move it out. So making a new layer. Some of them I'm going to move a little bit higher. Let's go back to my brush tool. And some of them I'll just move out. And later on, once we get all of these layers in, we'll just merge them. And I don't have to make an exact trace, I'm just basically doing my best to approximate it. It doesn't have to be super duper precise. Move this out, and I've got one more, and I'll move this up. And now what I can do is I've got all of the pieces, they've all been separated, I traced them and just moved them over. Now I can hide my original layer that contained the first image that I drew, and now I can merge all of the other layers together. So all the visible layers that I have, if I select the topmost layer, scroll down the layers panel to the last visible layer here, which in this case is layer 2, I can hit Command E. Command E merges the selected layers. It's a really good keyboard shortcut. It's Control E on Windows, and I'll just call this pencils. You can just double click on a layer and then you can give it a name. And the next part of this tutorial is to go ahead and add some thickness. So that's what I'll do. So I'll start by drawing some vertical lines. And what's really neat about this is there's going to be some overlap between these different objects. And some of them are going to have, maybe I'll just make it like this, where it's going to look a little bit more organic, as opposed to just being like a block. Okay, so now I've got some thickness applied to these objects. And then what I want to consider here is You know, texture, like what is the surface? Is it rocky? If it is, maybe I'll just put in some dots. And I also want to consider the fact that, you know, maybe adding some shading. Let's assume that we're getting some light, and I'll just make a new layer here, and I'll just draw a kind of a sun, right? Which I'll get rid of that later on. But when I'm going to shade, I'm just going to just first of all draw some vertical lines on the side of the blocks that are facing away from the sun. And this is just representing the part that is shaded. And shading is something that also connotes this idea of depth. And then probably this side right here will be completely shaded since it's completely facing away from our sun. And you can see right away that when we're adding these lines, what it's doing is it's giving the shapes some form, and it's giving them a sense of thickness and mass. And we're all able to do that just by virtue of adding our shading. Overlap is another great way to signify, you know, depth. And so now what we'll do is these are my pencils. And so what I'll do is I'll go to the opacity, I'll drop the opacity, I'll hide the sun since I don't need that anymore. And now I'm going to make a brand new layer. Shift Command Option N, or Shift Alt Control N. That keyboard shortcut will hopefully be emblazoned in your head because I will go over that multiple times. So I'm going to make a new layer here called Inks. And I'm labeling these layers just for convenience. It's just a good habit to get into. Of course, I don't always follow the things that I say, but it is important nevertheless. I'm going to now pick my inking brush, and what I will do now is I will just simply go over my existing lines, and the lines that are going to be closer to the viewer, which is facing us, I'm going to make them a little bit thicker. And I'm going to do that by pressing down a little bit harder. And so take a look at that. So I've got this block. This block right here. And again, I'm not going to worry about shading until later on. And of course, I could add some certain things to this floating island, but I just didn't. I'm just showing the process from start to finish, and I don't want to really necessarily make something super detailed, but I think this is something that's very doable if you're a beginning artist. There's no characters, there's none of that stuff, so it should make it a little bit less intimidating. And notice that as I'm inking, all of my inks are on the same layer. Does that have to be the case? No. But for this example, it makes sense. If I had a lot of different characters that were in different poses that I wanted to potentially reposition, then it would make sense for me to put each character on its own separate layer. But this is an example where I think I can be just fine getting away with keeping all of my inks on the same layer. And again, I'm trying to use my entire arm, not my wrist. I'm also trying to close the gaps because at some point I'm going to go ahead and color. Do you need to close the gaps? No. There are many artists that use an open line where they don't close all their gaps. But if you're new, it's just a good habit to get into because it just makes the coloring process a lot easier, but it's not a must-have. So I've got my inks. I'll just go ahead and put a few little dots just to kind of provide the idea that this has got some kind of a rocky, stony type of texture. You know, I might even just improvise here and just add one or two stones. just to make it more visually interesting, I guess. Don't have to, but it's what I'm going to do. And now let's come back and add our shading. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just use my right bracket key, make the brush just a little bit bigger. I'm just going to make those lines, and it's okay if they're curvy, that's fine. Kind of adds more interest. That bracket key is a really powerful tool. It's a quick way of increasing or decreasing your brush size. And the objective here is not perfection. The objective is to have fun and to learn and to feel like you're making some progress. I hope you're having fun with this. We're going to keep all the coloring stuff very simple. Chances are, if you're brand new to digital drawing, there's going to be time where you can learn more complex coloring techniques. We just want to start very simple. So I'll just go ahead and finish this up. As I craft these lessons for my videos, the idea is to kind of just, you know, have this idea that we're working in the same studio together. Obviously you're watching this online, so it's not exactly that, but you know, that is my goal, to make it seem like it's a classroom environment. All right, so we've got our floating islands, we've got our shading in place. Let's now turn off the visibility of our pencils layer. You can just click on the eyeball, it hides that, and now we're left with something that just has inks. Okay, and when we color, what we want to do is we want to color on a layer that is beneath our inks layer. So what is helpful to do sometimes is to actually lock your layers so you don't accidentally color on them. So I'm going to click the lock button here. That shows a small padlock. That means that I can no longer edit that layer unless I click on the lock once again. But that prevents me from accidentally drawing or coloring or inking on that same layer. And it's a really good habit to get into, to lock the layers that you're not using. So I'll now make a brand new layer, Shift, Option, Command, N. And let me show you a really neat shortcut. But before I do that, let me just zoom in to make sure I don't have any open gaps. And it looks like I don't. So what I'm going to do next is something new. I'm going to make sure that my magic wand tool is active, and if you don't see it, you want to make sure that you go to the toolbar, and you might see something like quick selection or object selection. The magic wand tool is tucked away there. Make sure that tool is active, and then make sure that the following settings that are in the options menu are checked. Anti-alias, contiguous, and sample all layers. Those all need to be checked. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually click outside of our rocks. And when I do that, I can see something right away. These little marching ants are showing me what is selected. But notice this. I have one little open gap on this rock. So part of this rock is being selected. So let me go back and fix that. So to deselect my selection, I can hit Command or Control D. And let's go back to that ink layer. Let's unlock it. Let's now fill in that gap. There we go. And now let's try it again. Let's lock the layer. Let's go down to the bottom. We'll use the magic wand tool. The keyboard shortcut is W for wand. If I click on that, now you can see everything outside of the rocks are being selected. So what I would like to do now is I want to select only the rocks. There's another keyboard shortcut that I want you to know. It's very powerful. It's called the inverse selection option. If you hold down Shift Command I or Shift Control I on a Windows machine, that flips the selection to now selecting only the islands. And don't worry if you're trying to remember all of these keyboard shortcuts. As the lessons progress, I'll keep repeating what I'm saying, but it's really important that I expose you to these keyboard shortcuts right away. So now that I can look at this, I can see that the Magic Wand tool and my selections are only around the rocks. So let's pick a base color, and I'm just going to pick this color over here. And now I want to introduce you to another keyboard shortcut that I'll be using for quite some time, and that is the Option Delete or the Alt-Backspace key. If you press down Option Delete, that will take your foreground color, which is right here, and it will fill that color into your selection. That's Option Delete on a Mac, Alt-Backspace on a PC. And that's pretty cool because right away I was able to quickly color everything that I needed to color. And now I want to deselect, so Command D or Control D deselects. So maybe the earth part of this, like the side parts of these rocks, are going to be comprised of, say, mud, right? So what I'll do is I'll use my Magic Wand tool, I'll click on one of the side areas, and I'll zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. And to continue to select more of the side of this particular rock, I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and you can see that when I do, the Magic Wand tool has a small plus next to it. That means that the Magic Wand tool, with the Shift key held down, will add to my selection. So I can click, and you can see that my existing selection is now being appended to with the Magic Wand tool. So that's pretty neat. We'll do that again. I'm going to go ahead and hold the Shift key down. I'm going to now select the second side of this floating island. I'm going to click, and notice that it selects everything on the side. It still preserves the first selection. Well, I think I'm on a roll here, so let's do it for the third rock. Okay, I'm holding down the Shift key. That's why you see the plus button or the plus icon, right? And I'll just, now I want to do something special. I haven't selected all of the rocks. Maybe I will. Okay, let me just do that again. Again, holding down the Shift key. I've got a gap here, so I'm going to avoid doing that. I've got a gap there. Yeah, so I think I'm just going to go with what I currently have and just show you the technique. I want to change the color of the objects that are selected. Now I have a couple of ways that I can do this. I could pick another color, like say a dark brown, and I could hit Option Delete or Alt-Backspace, but I want to show you another way that I think is faster. It involves two steps. The first step is I want to take the selections that I have and I want to move them to a new layer. The way I'm going to do that is if I hit the Command J key or Control J on a PC. You can see that now my selections are all on their own layer, right? So if I hide this, you can see that the selections that I just selected are now showing up. So that's the first step. The second step is I can hit Command U or Control U on a PC, and I can adjust the hue. So I can go ahead and make this brown. And then I can click OK. So pretty neat. Instead of me having to use the brush tool and color all of that, I've been able to quickly color multiple rocks at a time. So let's continue this experiment over here. Let's see if I go ahead and select the Magic Wand tool. I'll go back to my base color layer and I'll hold down the Shift key. makes very quick work of selecting stuff. And I'm selecting only the areas that are colored in green right now. And there's a small area down here that I forgot. Command J jumps the selection onto its own layer. Command U brings up the hue saturation slider, and I'm just going to just dial the saturation, or the hue rather, to this brownish color. Pretty neat, right? Again, we're keeping the coloring very basic. This is what is known as color flats, and we'll talk entirely about color in forthcoming videos, but right now I'm just showing you the process with just a little bit more insight. We're going to explore this in much greater detail in the subsequent videos. So I have a few additional stones that are over here. Let's go ahead and make a new layer. Shift Option Command N, and let's use the magic wand tool, and let's select the stones. Oh, the stone has an open gap, but this stone doesn't. And now what I can do is I can go back and I can choose my dark gray, and I'll just hit Option Delete. And those little gaps that I have here, see that gap? I can just now color that with my brush tool, B for brush, right? Then I can switch back to my magic wand tool, Option Delete. And this other tiny rock is really, really small, so I'll just go ahead and just use the brush tool on that. So now I have these rocks and this floating island on a white background. So let's change that. Let's go all the way to the layer that is right. And we'll select the pencil layer. We'll make a new layer above it. Shift Option Command N. We'll use a bluish color, a light blue. And I want to fill that light blue as a background behind all of the rocks. Again, what I'll do is I'll hit Option Delete or Alt-Backspace, and you'll notice it filled the entire area with that blue color. What was different from what we did before? Well, before we made a selection and then we jumped the selection, right? In this particular case, what I'm doing here is I don't have a selection. I'm just on an empty layer, and if I hold down the Option Delete or Alt-Backspace key, it fills that entire layer up with that blue color. So at this point, if it's an assignment for a class on these drawings, you can take the bottom area here and you can label it. I'll just go ahead and just select a black value here. I've made a new layer, Option Delete, and then maybe what I'll do is I'll pick a white color and I'll just type in John Doe. And if the text is too big, I can use the type tool and hit Command A to select the whole thing. And I can drop the size of the font down. If you go up to the top here, it says it's 37 points. I'll just type in 27. And there are other ways that you can scale and stuff, but I'm not going to talk about that on this video. So you can label it with the name, floating islands, and whatever else you need to include. In fact, this is probably a little bit too big, so I can just drop this down to say 17. And then you can add what other information you need to add. And lastly, if we want to save this off as a JPEG, what we can do is we can come up to File, we can go down to Export, and we can choose Save for Web. And when you do that, you'll get this dialog box. You'll want to make sure that you choose JPEG, verify the size, it's 4,000 by 4,000 pixels, and you can hit Save, and it'll prompt for a name, and it'll say Floating Islands, and I can save this onto my desktop. Of course, I haven't saved the PSD file, which I probably should, so I can save this on my computer. I'll save this on my desktop. I'll call it Floating islands. And there you go. What I've done is I've penciled, I've inked, I've colored a set of floating islands, and in the process you learned about using the magic wand tool, you learned about filling colors in, you learned about taking a selection and moving that selection to its own layer. So there's a lot to unpack here in this video. So I hope you found it to be informative. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear your feedback on what I've done here. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.